Bonsoir. Good evening from the French Church of Saint-Esprit. We're here with our regular Wednesday evening Bible study, back together again. Actually, I think there's been a couple where I've done it or you've done it, and now...
I think we each did one on our own, and now we're back together.
So we're back together.
Yes.
So I'm the Reverend Nigel Massey. I'm the rector of the French Church of Saint-Esprit.
I am Joris. I'm the curate at Saint-Esprit as well. Voilà.
Good. Well. Yes. While we're going through, do please feel free to make comments in the chat, even if you're watching us a little bit later on. We always go back and have a look at the interactions. And it's nice to say hello if you pop up in the chat too. So, bonsoir, Race. Nice to see you.
So tonight we're going to have a look, continuing with the Gospel of Luke. That's the reading, of course, for next Sunday. So we always do our Bible study on Wednesday with the readings, with one of the readings for the following Sunday. So you can start, and we can start thinking about it, not only for the sermon, but partially, and really to come to the text on Sunday, having prepared it, having read and meditated over it, and also looked at different aspects of it that might not show up in the sermon, or there's way more to this text than what can be shared in one sermon on Sunday. So it's our time together to explore this. So tonight we're going to have a look at Luke 17:5-10, and you'll see that maybe one of the themes that will come up is serving, maybe without credit. We'll see what it means.
Here's our little opening prayer before we begin. Let us pray. O blessed God, who caused all Holy Scripture to be written for our learning, grant us so to hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that we may embrace and hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life, which you have given us in our Saviour Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. So tonight we're going to do as we do usually, that is, we read the text in three different translations, the original being written in Greek, since it's a gospel. And so we're going to read it in the New Revised Standard Version updated, in the French Nouvel Français Courant, and in the translation/paraphrase in English called The Message. So as we read it, if there's something that catches your attention, feel free to share it in the chat, and we can also discuss it.
Here it is then, Luke 17:5-10. The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." The Lord replied, "If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you. Who among you would say to your slave who's just come in from ploughing or tending sheep in the field, 'Come here at once and take your place at the table'? Would you not rather say to him, 'Prepare supper for me, put on your apron and serve me while I eat and drink. Later you may eat and drink'? Do you thank the slave for doing what was commanded? So you also, when you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'We are worthless slaves. We have done only what we ought to have done.'"
Maintenant, en français. Les apôtres dirent au Seigneur, « Augmente notre foi. » Le Seigneur répondit, « Si vous aviez de la foi gros comme un grain de moutarde, vous diriez à cet arbre, à ce mûrier, « Déracine-toi et plante-toi dans la mer. » Et il vous obéirait. Supposons ceci. L'un d'entre vous a un serviteur qui laboure ou qui garde les troupeaux. Lorsqu'il le voit revenir des champs, lui dira-t-il « Viens vite te mettre à table !» Non, il lui dira plutôt « Prépare mon repas, puis change de vêtements pour me servir, pendant que je mange et je bois. Après quoi, tu mangeras et tu boiras à ton tour. » Doit-il remercier son serviteur d'avoir fait ce qui lui était ordonné ? Il en va de même pour vous. Quand vous aurez fait tout ce qui vous est ordonné, dites « Nous sommes des serviteurs ordinaires, nous n'avons fait que notre devoir.
And here we are in the paraphrase version, the modern paraphrase version, the Message. The apostles came up and said to the Master, "Give us more faith." But the Master said, "You don't need more faith. There is no more or less in faith. If you have a bare kernel of faith, say the size of a poppy seed, you could say to this sycamore tree, 'Go jump in the lake,' and it would do it. Suppose one of you has a servant who comes in from ploughing the field or tending the sheep. Would you take his coat, set the table, and say, 'Sit down and eat'? Wouldn't you be more likely to say, 'Prepare dinner, change clothes, and wait table for me until I've finished my coffee, then go into the kitchen and have your supper'? Does the servant get special thanks for doing what is expected of him? It's the same with you. When you've done everything expected of you, be matter of fact and say, 'The work is done. What we were told to do, we did.'"
That's interesting today, I find. The translations give away very different things.
They do, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. I suppose people are more familiar with sycamores than they are mulberries, and poppies than they are, well, I don't know, everybody has mustard, but it doesn't come in seed form, does it?
No,
unless you're buying Dijon.
Yes.
Thing, or some German thing.
Yes, moutarde à l'ancienne. Yeah. No, it's also interesting how they translate this. Things that tend to shock us, I think. We are worthless slaves.
Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit about that. How it's rendered differently, and it's interesting because the term in Greek, I guess, could be stretched to mean like ordinary, but in matter of fact, the work is done. I think it's trying to translate the spirit rather than the exact form of the thing because of the Yeah. So we'll talk about that. But it's interesting. If there's anything that popped up for you, just share it in the chat and we can talk about it as well. So first thoughts.
That's on our first thoughts. It struck me, I've been looking at it and looking at your notes and having a think. And I thought, do we ever pray, increase our faith? I can't think of a collect that puts it quite that way. Maybe there is one and I'm just too tired to think of it.
Yeah. I don't know.
It just seems like a funny prayer somehow. I could see people, well, no, maybe increase our hope, increase our faith, increase our love.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, that's something you would say, I guess, if you're going through something that's extremely difficult and you doubt into how you're going to go through the situation. We'll see that's exactly the context in which the disciples are asking this question, actually. Right. Let's start with the Episcopal Church recommends a couple of questions over the last few years. The last few years when this reading popped up, that is year C, there are a lot of different questions so that we can keep them in mind as we do our study tonight. The first one is, have you ever felt like the disciples? Consider how Jesus' reversal of thought speaks to you and your faith.
Yeah. Okay. Sometimes these questions are related to a little narrative that's gone beforehand, and it's difficult to pluck out ones that are universally applicable without looking at that.
Yes. The second one, I'm sure, is strange. Do you feel that you have found the right balance of faith and works? The question is theologically problematic.
It is.
Because I'm not sure there are works without faith. And if it's a balance, that means that you're supposed to do a little bit of both, which is not really how it works. I think Jesus' answer is really going against this mentality of quantity.
Yes. Yeah. And is asking a mulberry tree to be uprooted and thrown into the sea a good work?
Yes. Yeah. He's probably playing humor again. Yeah. Do you rely on your faith to inspire you and empower you to do the work Jesus asked us to do?
Well, what else can we rely
Yes.
on some days? And why would we do it if we didn't think that way? If, well, as small as it might be.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes maybe, we can rely on other things. Pride.
Feeling of I've accomplished that, therefore I can do that,
Yes.
Like a feeling of, I think that's what Jesus's the second story basically now reading is after, it's not because of what you've accomplished, you do things out of faith in what you're called to do. We all have moments when we feel not enough, something enough. Oh, okay. We'll not feel something enough. What is usually in that blank for you? Okay, that makes sense. How do you remember that you are a wonderfully made child of God? It's kind of a clash after the worthless servants or worthless slaves. Yeah.
There are moments when we feel not awake enough, or not vigilant enough, or not.
We all have moments when we feel, not energetic enough, or not,
not faithful enough. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah.
What is usually in that blank? Listening enough, for sure.
Yeah. Tricky.
How do you remember that you are a wonderfully made child of God? It's interesting because the very act of remembering itself, you don't do it without God, I find, you see.
No. No, you're right. Yeah.
Given the fact that Jesus mentioned slavery as a given in his society, what structural sins are we guilty of today? That's one of these questions kind of plugged in onto the text, as we'll see.
I think so, and that was from this year's Bible study.
Okay,
when it's just a topic in the Episcopal Church.
Yeah. I mean, we are going to discuss, of course, the social reality of slavery in Jesus' time, but it's the reality of slavery itself is not at all what Jesus is talking about in this text. Okay. Well, as we mentioned, it's the text in context, and we're going to explore a little bit of this tonight. What's quite interesting is that our passage starts with these weird questions like increase our faith. So you might wonder why they're suddenly asking that, right? Well, there are a lot of good reasons for why they're asking that, because Jesus has been giving a lot of teachings that seem totally impossible to do and to follow, or to even, start to trust in. So that's why they're kind of wrecked there, and they're saying like, okay, we can't do that, increase our faith. And he's been teaching in Luke 16. There are a couple of parables about wealth that we've been reading over the last few weeks. And just before this passage, as the first few verses before, in the 17th chapter of Luke, there's this very famous warning against causing others, and the small one, the little ones, to stumble. And he says, like the famous, it would be better for them to have a millstone around their neck and thrown into the sea, once again, like the mulberry tree, than to actually scandalize any of these little ones. And the second warning or call is a repeated call to forgive. 7 times during the same day, if your brother comes back to you and asks for forgiveness, which is, you have the impression Jesus is trying to poke his disciples by, using things that sound absurd. And the disciples are probably totally flabbergasted, or they don't know what's happening, they're disoriented. And they're like, okay, if we actually have to do that, increase our faith, because that doesn't make quite sense, what you're saying. So that's the context in which we are when Jesus continues actually and adds on with more images that are disturbing, and that's the passage where we're in, where the apostles ask for faith, and Jesus points to a mustard seed, trust, and a form of humble service through this second story that we'll see is very wisely introduced in a way that's typical of his way of teaching as well. Yeah. And after, there's some teachings about healing, the 10 lepers, the themes of gratitude and faith come back, and more teachings on the kingdom and the Son of Man's coming. So the apocalyptic dimension of Jesus's coming, the Son of Man's coming. And you see, we are already kind of in an otherworldliness with all these stories, because that's definitely not how, you think about things usually. You don't look at the little seed, you look at the big tree. So that's the context of our text tonight. That's a beautiful picture. Parable of the shrewd manager, that we saw in Luke 16.
When you look at the sayings in this passage, I think all of us have probably been struck by this if we've read it before, is that there seems to be a very loose connection between a grain of mustard seed and a mulberry tree being thrown into the sea, and the following little glimpse, or little story, or saying that Jesus says afterwards, what's the mustard seed and the mulberry tree, and asking for more faith got to do with being a servant and saying, "I've just done my just done my job." It seems like an elderly relative that's starting to lose the thread and has hopped from one story to another.
Yes.
So as we read it, we've got to be aware of creating these forced connections between some of these sayings, between different passages. But we've also got to be aware that there's a possibility that there's some connection that we haven't actually glimpsed, or that we don't quite get, or may not understand. I'm sure Jesus didn't set out his teaching in a modern, methodical, expository sort of way. He was more sort of saying what needed to be said.
Yeah, and there's a huge gap between Jesus actually uttering them and the recording of them like decades after. So
which is why some scholars have said, listen, these two stories have just been stitched in there because they had to find a placeholder for it. So Luke, who's normally quite careful in his order and structures, in this instance and a couple of others in his gospel, maybe he's just put them in one sequence and said, well, this one could just go there. It doesn't have much to do with the other one. May not have thought that way, but he thought it was important to preserve those two sayings, and therefore they got stuck together. So we hope this evening maybe to see if there is a connection between those two things, or if there isn't, what would you just preach on one without reference to the other? And which one would you select? Would you like a grain of mustard seed, or would you like to be a worthless slave?
Yeah, that's interesting. And they actually probably both. There is both these two stories that come together in this jarring effect of having these two stories that kind of matches with the images themselves, which are jarring. The fact that he sets in a row two jarring stories that are themselves jarring. I think it's definitely part of the teaching by shock way of Jesus.
Which we've seen before.
Yeah. Here the picture of mustard seeds, very small and tiny, as we saw. Yeah. So there is this demand of the disciples, increase our faith. And we may see this request to Jesus as linked to the warning and exhortations that he gave, in the verses 1 to 4, because they see faith as a prerequisite in that situation for the works they're called to do. And so they say, oh my God, if we have to actually forgive someone who comes 7 times to us during the day, we need more than what we actually think we have. But Jesus answered them in a way that really makes them not think in terms of like quantity and adding on, but that makes them tries to make them realize that what he's asking of them is not impossible. So there's also kind of a clash here between the idea of like worthless servants and the fact that he says basically, if you have the faith of this, you can already do a lot of things.
Amazing
yes,
things.
you can do amazing things that seem, totally impossible, like this tree being first uprooted. First, you talk to a tree, which is but there's a lot of things that are humoristic in this situation. Of course, first you talk to a tree. The tree decides to move. It's not like some external hand that takes the tree. The tree is actually uprooted and going there, and the tree obeys you. So the tree has some agency in the story. So I think there's a lot of definitely play with magics and things like this. Is kind of pulling all the ropes of the fable of stories, of marvelous like Arabian Nights stories here, and this little very sketchy story. So there's a lot at play here in this text between like what's possible and what's impossible. And Jesus' teaching is trying to show them that what they think is impossible, they can already do it because if they trust in God. So Jesus' replies says implicitly that faith is not something which needs to increase, but simply needs to exist. It's about a relationship. It's not about stuff you have. And that's Jesus himself, God, who reminds them of that. And that's what we see in these two stories. So even if faith exists, even in mustard seed proportions, one would be able to do seemingly impossible things, like these very acts of forgiveness that are asked of the disciple in verse 1 to 4. So the apostles do not need to be daunted by high demands or by other requirements of their calling, basically. They can fulfill them. There's this form of encouragement there.
Yes, I just struck by that, because very often we read that thing, if you had faith as big as a mustard seed, you could do this, so your faith must be a lot smaller.
Yeah.
But it's not actually about that, I don't think.
There is
a sort of reassurance to it. There's a chastising of the disciples that they don't know what they've been given.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's reassuring for us.
It is reassuring, I think. Yes.
It's all right.
And there's
you will be able to do it. Yeah. God is faithful, and He will do it. As have no anxiety about anything, but in everything, make your requests.
And it's fun because they actually have faith the size of a mustard seed.
Yes.
They say we don't have much, and Jesus says, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, which is actually what they have. They're saying we only have faith the size of a mustard seed. And Jesus says, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed. So he's actually, even as he kind of like chides them or like les tense un peu, he is still saying, you already have it. You have this little thing, if you had this little thing. So it's you can see also the proximity between Jesus and his disciples in this way of teaching. For sure.
So what is this connection then? Is there one between the mustard seed and the slave narrative that immediately follows it? Well, the interesting conclusion that Jesus draws from this story of the slave waiting on his master, not just in the field outside, but when he comes back in and serving the table, and then he can sit down, and that he shouldn't be expecting any thanks for that. The connection might be is that when the disciples have done everything that has been asked of them, they shouldn't think of themselves more highly or having more power or more something or other, more faith than anybody else, but to say we've just done what we were asked to do. We're not better because we've got tons more faith than other people.
It's fascinating because both texts also, when I was reading it, have the idea of obedience. If you tell to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and jump in and be planted in water, which is something totally absurd, then he, because I think it's masculine, he will obey you. And here you have this servant and this whole master-servant situation where they he also obeys and just does what he's supposed to do. So there's this theme of obedience that connects definitely the story of the mustard seed and the slave narrative.
And it's certainly true that even the tiniest bit of that faith can grow into a sort of transformative confidence. I was thinking earlier on of those people who, they jump into the sea or something to rescue a drowning person, and everybody says, "Oh, you've been such an amazing hero." Yeah. And then they turn around and say, "I didn't think at the time. Just jumped in and did it. I'm no better or worse than anybody else. It's just what you do."
Yeah, there's a question of being.
So this pistis, this trust that in one's instinct, maybe something like that. And the more you exercise it, the more it doesn't get bigger, or it gets more. We don't get more of it doshed on top of us because we're even more worthy than we did whatever it was that we did. It's simply part of a wonderful trusting continuum.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yes.
Yeah, there's basically a simple gift. Faith is uncountable. I think it's interesting to understand it this way, because the disciples are trying to measure it. But the simple gift of faith is always more important than what can be done with it. We've seen it in Luke 10, 19 to 20, when the disciple can do many wonderful things, but it's not these achievements, these healings or anything they've been doing that's actually, writing their names in heaven. It's the fact that they're thankful for the gifts of God. So it's looking back. Look, what Jesus is trying to have them do through this story is look back at the source of everything, of their blessing, of their faith, which is in God, and who we are is when we are in relationship to God, not at the things themselves that we do, be them good or bad, really. And I think the whole question of the worthiness plays into that. If we think about the things you do and the forgiveness that comes just before the bit, like in verses 4, it's all about forgiving. Being able to forgive someone is realizing that you don't treat the person through their action. You don't measure them through their action. You measure them because of who they are, created in God's likeness, and because you look at the source of all forgiveness and love, because you look at how you have been forgiven. That's how you can have this act of faith, which is to forgive, even forgive 70 times 7. So he's trying to kind of like, they're kind of frozen, I find. I mean, and they're looking at
I think this passage is a really important one to look at, in contrasted with the story of the unworthy, a slave, because they come back, don't they, after the mission that Jesus sends them on, and they come back thrilled. Because they said, not only did we heal the sick, we cast out demons. And Jesus says, I saw Satan fall from heaven. And then he said, don't rejoice at this. You'll do even greater things than this. But rejoice that your name is written in the book of life. Only once. Doesn't need to be written in there multiple times.
No.
As if God might have forgotten.
Exactly. That's this increase of faith. I mean, when I was preparing the slideshow, I was struggling to find illustration. But I'm sorry, it reminded me of masculinist Christianity, which is always trying to look, build up this idea you should be like doing more of this, more of that, more, It's all about this like being beefed up in Jesus, basically. And that's definitely not what Jesus is talking about here. Your faith is measured to by your relationship to God and your relationship to others that are built up with through forgiveness, that are built up through serving, which he is embodying, and he's talking about the Son of Man in the next chapter. So that's the measure, if we want to use the term measure of faith.
And we see that in the comments too. The ultimate mandate is to love our neighbour and to love God, to love ourselves, and there's no quantity to that.
Yeah.
It's not, well.
Christ holding the book of life. Now, what's very interesting in this, especially the second short story he gives us with this servant, is that it's something Jesus often does. There are multiple instances of a story that starts like this in the Gospels, and it's a way of teaching that starts by addressing the people who are listening to him by saying, you already do that. I mean, you already know the way. So it's inviting them to discern in an everyday principle of wisdom or things that people do to just do it this way, some reality about the kingdom. So he uses a very incarnate reality, relation, situation to give a teaching, often through a question, which forces them into one direction, of course, that forces them to agree with what he is saying, which is like very good rhetorics.
Yes.
And leads them to realize that they already have the answer. And the disciples came to him, say, increase our faith. And he's basically telling them through two stories that they already have the answer.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's extremely comforting, I find, when you pay attention to his rhetorics, the way he teaches. Because you see, there's similar parables than the one we just read. For instance, the parable about the neighbor. Which of you who has a friend will go to him at midnight? And then, and then of course people answer, well, of course we
give them a piece of bread.
Yes.
Especially if he knocked on the door constantly.
Yes, and bothers us. Yes. Yeah. Which judge, will, grant even if she's not, doing exactly. Yeah. Or this question like, what about what father amongst you, if his son asks for a sheep, will give him a snake? So all these questions that people are going to, and you can imagine the people who were listening to him were actually answering. They were not like quietly or not quietly listening in the pews. They would actually interact with Jesus as he teaches. I think we see that if you watch The Chosen, you see that a little bit as well. So all of these rhetorical questions that Jesus is asked, they encapsulate a situation of daily life of his society, and through a vivid question, and it's supposed to help the disciples realize that they already do or know what they're supposed to do through wisdom. So the Spirit is already planted in them. The faith is planted in them. God doesn't abandon us. Yes. And we can grow from that. Let this little grain grow. And so then Jesus applies this principle to an aspect of humans' relationship with God. So for instance, the story of all of these other parables, but the one we have here, he says like, it's basically this, you do that in your daily life, apply it to your relationship with God. And it often starts the second part with, I tell you. So it's kind of the interpretation of the wisdom derived from daily life.
Yes, and innate. As we can see in Deuteronomy chapter 5, there's a growth of understanding because we suddenly see something that was in there all the time, but until it was put in this way, we couldn't see it. So the question that with I tell you is a good way of teaching that.
Yeah, and when you think it's God who says that, it's a little more powerful. Yeah.
So there's a great deal of common sense in this, really, at the end of the day, because, of course, a master isn't going to invite the slave to eat first. In that case, the master would have had to prepare the table and, put everything out there and, invite the slave to come in and eat first. So, there's nothing weird about the teaching. It's the slave who prepares the meal and eats afterwards. Part of the slave's job. He doesn't think that the master is going to owe him any favours for doing it, as we'll see again a little bit later on. As you point out, Joris, later, that this rendering of thanks in the translations isn't just about social niceties. Jesus is using this very vivid image and this story to talk about these basic mutual understanding of the social roles of the time.
Yeah, he could have used any other situation when you just do something because that's what people do. I was thinking maybe like mother and baby, this type of things where there is no, that's what you do. And so maybe we could understand it better, I think. I mean, a parallel we can think is that, for instance, with a waiter-client relationship in a restaurant, you don't tell the waiter to sit down.
Let's have a nice seat and
yes. So it's what's interesting Jesus there, and we'll see it as we unpack this whole question of slavery, is not the whole concept or reality of slavery. It's the relationship.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what we're focused on here.
Yeah.
I tend to get a little bit overwhelmed by that.
Yeah. So, of course, this parable, I don't know if it's a parable, but this short story, let's say, is a reflection of Jesus' society. So it's an agrarian society that is, the person is, and he addresses them directly. He says, if amongst you who have slaves. So it's addressing people who have slaves who would be doing the farm work, really. Plowing, keeping sheep, things that other people might do actually who are not slave. Neighbor might not be a slave and doing the same work. So it's definitely a slave-owning society, as we well know. There's a social, the people Jesus is addressing at the time have a lot of different ways of life. Some, might actually be themselves shepherds. We hear the story about the lost sheep as well. And some might actually also have slaves, if any of you who has a slave. So he's addressing one person. But everybody understands what it implies in terms of social roles. And the person who has slave is not addressed here in the sense of his social status, wealth, and everything is addressed here in terms that everybody understands these social relations. So it's very different from addressing the reality of slavery as a whole. That's not what Jesus is after.
No.
And if people didn't own slaves themselves, they would still think of this relationships dynamic as normal and the wise way to do. The other way around is shocking. And yeah, I find it's kind of an interesting passage, because we'll see that Jesus in other places questions and reverses the social dynamic of the time. But here he uses one element to try to make his point. Yeah. Here you have a statuette of a slave boy waiting with a lantern for his master. It's a Roman. You see it here. Yeah. So it's definitely an overwhelming part of the society of its time, as we'll see. Yeah.
One of the understandings of it, of course, is that in the end we're thrust into a position where we have to consider the fact that God is a slave owner. If we push it too far, and we've got the divine passive there, all that is commanded of you.
Yeah.
Say all that God commands of you, all that I command of you.
Yeah.
And of course this is going to raise questions for us. Jesus' teaching can't be anything other than the teaching of his time. He's not going to turn around and say, well, in 2,000 years' time, the fact that you have slaves is utterly shocking.
Yes.
That people
well, it depends on which society today, too.
We'll see that in a minute.
Yeah.
So, of course, Jesus' teaching is going to be using the normalities, the social normalities of the time. I didn't quite understand the picture on the right. I put it in there.
Ni Dieu ni maître, because we are looking at God as master too.
Okay.
And
Ni
that's
patron, ni mari.
Yes, it's a graffito anarchist, I think, graffito, and feminist graffito. That's why I put. It's extremely difficult to find illustration of everything we're talking about, as you can imagine. If you type on Google God as slave owner, you find nothing.
No.
That's worth showing you. There are a lot of ChatGPT or like AI created images that now also show up. Yeah.
We got our friend here on the left, Adolf Jülicher, who made some really interesting comments about the way that Jesus teaches. And he singled out these little question parables, like, which of you would do this? And what we tended to do with what essentially is just a simple simile that is, that they're not simple similes. It's not like, well, now we've got this, we can understand God as a slave owner, we can understand ourselves as slaves, they behave like this, so we extrapolate a massive amount from a little question. So we really shouldn't stretch these comparisons and to turn them into great blown-up pictures on the big screen of each person in these small little vignettes to be accurate, essentializable portrayals of God. God is like a good shepherd, so therefore God is a good shepherd. God is this, that, or the other. It's a bit like a great dispute that arose in Islam, who said that the Quran says that God has a throne, therefore God must have a bottom.
Yes, that's a big
scandal. You see, you can't extrapolate from this image that is intended to convey a truth that is not, we wouldn't say literal, but that literal truth that we extract from it can often be based on our own inventions and our own perceptions about life and society and the way we relate to other people. So he makes this point very strongly. Do not take these little snapshots, blow them up massively, and say this is an accurate, essentializable portrait of who and what God is. If there is a similarity, it doesn't imply that there's an equality between this story and what you've made of it.
Comparaison n'est pas raison, and that's the point. I mean, he's using this story. You see, it's an extremely polemic in a sense. It's a polemic doesn't mean that he's fighting, but he means that he's arguing about a situation, teaching situation. So he uses this image, and as we see, it has some ramification in the Hebrew Bible, of course. But here, it's you cannot extrapolate. I think that's really the main point about any metaphor that's in the Bible. Because they're giving, comparing a given attitude or correlation doesn't imply that every one of the characters are comparable.
No. And that final point is crucial, because not only do we sort of extrapolate for an image and say, well, God must be a slave owner and we must be slaves, we then go on to make a huge doctrinal issue out of it. And spin it into all sorts of things like faith and works, as we saw from the question from the Episcopal Bible study. That's not the point of this little vignette, to take us into a great, Reformation debate that caused a lot of bloodshed and schism in the church based on blowing stuff up and turning a story that's intended to give us a window into a fragment of truth into an ultimate dogmatic, doctrinal, definitive statement.
Yes, or actually being against that and talking only about, trying to debunk things that are in the first place not actually. I remember reading this book. I mean, from the, He's Got a Woman, for instance. Like, if you believe too much in the fact that God is a man, then you're going to need to have to debunk it. But if you realize that's one metaphor amongst others, then it's one way to look at it, and there's a deconstruction that happens. But we often fall on the other side of the horse when we look at this at these things, because we think in terms of, we doctrinalize metaphors, and metaphors are themselves alive. They are they're images, and Jesus as a Jew who know that images are problematic, wouldn't describe God through only one image, and that's the danger of images when they're used to images, or images or role in society. For instance, any human reality or realities of these words, when they're used to describe God, they'll
break down.
They break down. They
Hopefully
break down at one
before
point.
they can be a danger.
Yeah, they break down before they become. So, yeah.
We have a little slide here. We're going to talk about it in just 1 second. But here is a map of the prevalence of modern slavery by country. And you can see it from low, which is the paler colour, to high, which is the dark colour. We had a member of the church who was the warden when I first arrived, who founded a chair of law, international law at Harvard, and a charity here in New York City talking about modern slavery. Where is it now? Well, it's in the sweatshops of Chinatown, where people are paid nothing to stitch things until they earn enough to pay off the person who managed to get them in the country. It's indentured labour that hovers on the edge of slavery. Migrant people, as in the case of Russia, for instance, wherever there is a prevalence of war, too, or a strong and overweening government, you can find that the prevalence of slavery increases.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're going to see a little bit of that in a second on the next slide.
So that's a map, of course, of modern-day slavery. But the context where we're looking at in Jesus' time is the antiquity. The Roman Empire occupied Judea. Slavery was there way before the Roman occupation. I mean, it's a reality that goes back to, I don't know.
Ever since people have existed, I suppose.
Yeah, probably.
The
humans
weak are meat for the strong to eat.
Yes, that's definitely what it is. Or definitely when captives were made at war, and wars between human groups. That's how slavery. Because then you realize, actually, if we don't kill them, we can keep them and use them to do our work. So that's definitely how predation of human being on other human being started. So we of course look at the question of slavery today in the West, in the United States, but throughout the world, because that's how also the questions are shaped at the UN, are shaped in international law, in laws of many countries, through the post-Enlightenment understanding of slavery, which is also a reaction to modern expressions of slavery that we saw, like with, for instance, the transatlantic deportation of African to the Americas, to fuel the whole European industry of slavery in Europe and in Africa, in America. So that's the way through which we look at slavery, and we also look at it through the lens of racial ideologies, because for us it become also, especially in America, impossible to understand slavery without understanding it through racial ideologies, and the construction by Western theorists of just a racialist justification of slavery of certain groups of people. That's not the context of slavery in antiquity. There's no clear racialization, I don't think. There has been, I think, to a certain extent with the slave. Well, for the Romans, for instance, the people who were from the north were not considered, in the South, were not considered really in the medium. So people who were quite different from the people of the social group sometimes could be understood as slaves, but then there was no theories about it. The age of theories is recent in human history. So, and that's you could also fall into slavery because of indebtedness. You could fall in slavery because of war. There are many different ways in which you become a slave that was not attached to how you looked, for instance. And yes, that's why I put the little map. There are more slaves today in absolute numbers than in Jesus' time, but slavery was far more widespread and normalized then, proportionally speaking. They estimate, for instance, that in the Roman Empire, slaves may have made up to 10 to 30% of the population, depending on locations. And the locations where there would be the most slaves would be actually Italy, because there were huge farms there as well. And slaves were not only working on farms, they were working on mines. That's the most dangerous situation even today. A situation in which a slave would be in mine work. Salt mine, especially in the Roman Empire, employed a lot of slaves, and so there's this whole a whole society where there's an overlap also between the understanding of master and mastering, as a master and slave, but also master and children and wife and other relatives and dependents. That is, there's this clear overlap between until very recently in the West as well, and throughout the world it's still very much of a reality, between the father of a family, the pater familias figure, or the patriarch in Israel, and the master. So the master could even free a slave and adopt him or her, mostly him, as their heir. We see that in the story, for instance, of Abraham and Eliezer. We talked about that actually last week, and we were looking at Lazarus, and that there was a parallel there between Abraham and Lazarus and Abraham and Eliezer, because the rich man treated Lazarus like Abraham's slave, telling him, you should tell Lazarus to do that for me and do that for me. And we know from the book of Genesis that that's the big prayer of Abraham before he is given this promise of God, when he says, I have no heir, and the one who is going to inherit my property is Eliezer of Damascus, and who is my servant, so he's a slave. So, and if a man also had no children, his chief household slave could inherit that, which is the reality we see in the story of Abraham and Eliezer. So it's a very different understanding of slavery at the time too. And this story gives us the opportunity to look into that. And so slave-master relationship in antiquity. It's interesting because when we understand this context, this overlap that there was definitely between the father, which had this role of protecting, also dominating literally the decisions and everything within the family, but also protecting, had the authority of over the house and the duty to protect and provide for the family and defend it if needed be. There was also overlap between this father figure and the master. And we see that coming up again and again in the Hebrew Bible. There is in Jeremiah, for instance, "Return, O faithless children, say the Lord, for I am your master. I will take you, one from a city and two from a family, and I will bring you to Zion." So we bring them also a bit like, a master can bring and take his slaves where he wants. In Malachi, also at the beginning of Malachi, a son honors his father and servants their master. You see, it's put in as an equivalent there. If then I am a father, where is the honor due to me? And if I am a master, where is the respect due to me? Says the Lord of hosts to you, O priests who despise my name. So you see, these are two realities that are thought always together in the ancient world. In a way, maybe our modern understanding of what slavery is, if we think of workshops, for instance, in Chinatown, might not think of it this way. You see, so I think that's why it was interesting to look back at the reality of slavery in ancient times and how it's differed, is foundationally different from what we tend to see here on today or throughout the world, which of course varies a lot from one country to another. Yeah, here you see enslaved Romans performing agricultural work in the fields.
Thinking about this statement of Jesus about master and slave and all of this, it's the only one instance in which Jesus talks about this master-slave relationship. It doesn't appear anywhere else. It's one little vignette out of many, many others. And in fact, when you read the Gospels, both the Synoptics and John, we see that there's a role reversal going on. This role reversal is mentioned far more often than this funny little story about which of you who has a slave will tell him to sit down and eat before you. In Luke 12, we can see Jesus promising that the master is going to wait on the faithful servants. And in a little later on in the Gospel, in a couple of chapters' time, we're going to see that he calls on the people who are following him to imitate his example, Jesus' example. I am among you as one who serves. A conclusion that I quite like to use in prayer sometimes is we pray these things in the name of Jesus, the one who came not to be served but to serve. Because very often our prayers lead us to service, like in imitation of Jesus himself. So what we can see is that Jesus is indeed affirming the importance of thinking of God as master. He's in control. He's the creator. He's the heavenly Father. He's all blessing is in his hands.
He's the one he's serving as the suffering servant.
Yes, yeah. But in Jesus' life, he's displaying this new pattern for what such a masterhood really looks like. So yes, in Jeremiah and Malachi and other places in the Hebrew scriptures, we see very clearly that the master of a slave has a duty towards that slave as well as a commanding authority to protect and to sometimes to adopt. But here in Jesus' teaching and in Jesus' life, in his self-offering of obedience to his own master on the cross, it's turning over all of these social and societal expectations. He could command a legion of angels to come down and save him. But what does he do? He has a duty, and that duty of obedience has saved and protected us all, and turned us in turn into God's children.
That's that Paul continues on that. Now you're no longer called slaves. You're called adopted children.
Children and heirs of the kingdom.
Yes, and heirs of the kingdom. So there's a strong understanding of that, and this reality is not. I think that's what troubles me with certain of the questions that we had with the Bible study, is that you didn't want to look through these social realities as way of revelation of God's love, because it was slavery. You see?
That's right.
Where if you actually have to do the work and actually try to listen to the text as they talk to you, you realize that it's way more complicated than that, because it's not a taboo.
No,
it's not a taboo. And Jesus dresses it and talks through these realities in ways that we've just seen.
Yes, I think in the chat earlier on there was a reference to the washing of the feet, where the distinction between I and thou is blurred and becomes everybody reflected made in God's image. It's a lovely picture. Well, then, we've gone through some of this. Now, how can we use some of what we've learned? These pictures are not there to be sort of forced into a framework to say that God is ungrateful for what we do, that we're just unworthy servants and doing what we're supposed to do, so he doesn't even need to say thank you or take care of us, because he has a right to do with us whatever he wants. Neither, as we have just discovered, are these this statement about slavery implying that Jesus or God says, yes, okay, that's fine. If you want slaves, that's all right.
Yeah.
That's okay. We cannot get there.
No, from that either.
Story. That's not going to work.
Yeah.
We recognize
it's so much reading into the text.
Yes.
That's what is fascinating.
And, Jesus himself said, the Holy Spirit is coming to you, the Comforter, who will lead you into all truth. So even Jesus, let's not put it that way. It sounds a little heretical. So Jesus in his own time recognized that there was developments that were going to be based on his life of loving and giving service and his work on the cross and his resurrection. And that it is an important point, this, the second one here. Yeah. We are unworthy servants. We were only doing what we were supposed to do. That really sounds suspect to people who have seen the malign effect of some religious teachings today on our self-worth. Mm-hmm. It's a growing voice in certain parts of the world. Women are supposed to do this. They should sit down, shut up, and do what they're told. Their place is in the house, and they must understand that gives them dignity, not children, who they are. Yeah. Or having children and having a medal for having children.
Yeah, or children who are told, you're just a child, you should do that.
Yes.
I mean, there are many ways in which, can be, if it's used on you, it can be extremely patronizing.
Yes, it can.
Whereas it's interesting because they say it.
Mm-hmm.
It's they say, well, I think that's the French translation was interesting for that. Nous sommes juste des serviteurs ordinaires, we ordinary servants.
Yes, I like that way of putting it.
Yeah.
So really, the most innocuous way of reading this story about slavery, or this analogy with the slave, is that, okay, but do you praise one slave more than another in a certain way?
Mm.
Especially when they're all doing their job.
Yeah.
No special favors to.
That's what we get to with that. Yeah. Yes. So how to use this teaching? Well, it's a relatable comparison for the listeners of the time of Jesus that makes the point, I think, about discipleship isn't about winning plaudits or doing favors, but is really about duty and also a long-lasting relationship with God and his people, which is akin to the relationship that bounds a father to their children or a master to a slave. Mm-hmm. I think that's also what's behind this. And fulfilling God's and Jesus' command is possible through faith, but never becomes a cause of pride. I think that's what this what this story is about. They share household, they share the food, and they share together things. And of course, as we've mentioned, this image can be difficult to relate to for us today, but because also we tend today in a democratic society to say thank you to everybody, which was not the reality 300 years ago, or 200 years ago, or even 100 years ago. It's a social oil. That's something we do because we are all recognized as citizens or not, but individuals. So we thank very liberally, including to those who are only doing their duty. Like if you go to the post office, you say thank you to the lady. Well, she's paid to do it. Or the man who is at the post office, really, or anybody. So maybe exaggerating the thanks would make it more relatable. So imagine instead that you would give a bouquet or box of chocolate to a colleague or an employee of yours who helps out with something that's just part of their daily job description, which I wouldn't be against too. I mean, loving chocolate and flowers,
Yes.
but I might put on some weight. But that's a bit what I think Jesus is after in this story, and not, I think that's the teaching. What that's very interesting.
It's also interesting, isn't it, to think about how sometimes people complain that the world has changed so much that a child's drawing might be absolutely hopeless, but they brought it home and they get stuck up on the fridge, and people say that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my whole life. Or even if you've made mistakes in your maths homework, people say, oh, that's really wonderful effort. That's so great. You're just so amazing and wonderful for having even tried.
Yeah.
And there's this sort of I don't know where I'm going with this, but,
I see.
There's a sort of duty that the child has,
exactly.
to do their homework, or,
and we
whatever it is.
We wish people who are in situations where their duty call them to do things, could actually sometimes just do it without needing applause. I'm thinking of politicians.
Yes,
I mean,
quite.
do they need to politicians or priests?
Yeah.
You don't need to curate everything. I think there's a sense of, I think that's what Jesus is after. If you order your life towards God, you're going to serve not only God but others in ways that's appropriate.
Yeah.
And you don't need to brag about it.
Yeah.
And you don't need to brag about your children's results if they're actually,
it was funny,
doing
when
it
I was a child, you get lots of
appropriate.
presents from relatives that, I remember one particular difficult aunt that wasn't an aunt by relation, but when I was about, 14 or something, as a present, she gave me a shoe polishing kit.
Yeah.
I thought, and then, Mum would say, you've got to call her up and say, thank you very much. I thought, well, if I do that, it's going to be long conversations. She asked me about how school is going and all things children don't really like to be asked about. And she'd say, well, you'll feel better after you've done it. So I'd sit down and, telephone the person, the aunt or whoever it was. And always after that telephone call, she would say, there you go, duty done. And for some reason, that made me very happy.
Yeah. It's fun. My mom has also a saying like this, which was a bit more like the moral of Jesus, which was like, on ne fait pas toujours ce qu'on veut dans la vie. You don't always do what you want in life, which is a way of abiding and
yes, it is. Yeah,
learning patience and learning. That's what Madeleine de Brel, the French Dorothy Day, calls la passion des patiences, the passion of small little moments of patience, which is how we actually, not all of us are going to die on a cross or as a martyr. So that's how we slowly are going through our passion. Yeah. Well, on this feast of Sainte Thérèse of Lisieux, I think that's a good conclusion.
Yes. I think there's one.
Oh, there's one more.
Yes. So there's a sort of practical and spiritual insight there. You've got an enormous mulberry tree. So we've got a mulberry tree and a mustard seed in this thing. I think this is pointing to the fact that there is a certain humour in this, but also this truth that opens up to us for something that we already knew deep down, but we couldn't quite discern. Yeah. God can transform what seems to us currently to be impossible. Yeah. And let's remember, a mulberry tree also grows from a seed. And they're tiny, those mulberry seeds.
Yeah, they're probably even more tiny than...
Yeah, but it's like a cluster of blackberries or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Blackberry.
They're probably even more tiny than...
Yeah, they might even be more smaller than a mustard seed.
That's true.
So there's something... People must have known that, never come across a mulberry seed before in their lives, or a mustard seed either. But there you go. It's worth reflecting on what God can do with a little. Yeah. And what we can accomplish through God with the little that we have.
Yeah.
And that's very, very comforting.
It is. It is.
And that business about servant and duty that we just went into there a little bit, humans respond with faithful obedience. That's a great place to get to. Not look how good I am.
Yeah.
You know, there's that famous play by Bernard Shaw called The Devil's Disciple, and it plays on that old trope that there's a so-called good son and a so-called bad son. And of course the bad son turns out to be the good son in the end, because the bad son has just ended up congratulating himself for how fabulous he's been about one thing or another, and being given more and more, with which he's done less and less. Because he thinks the congratulations means that, you know, he deserves it or something.
Yeah, in the end, you end up living through the look of others, not through God's eyes.
Yeah.
Or your own eyes. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, in both of these stories, we tried to get to this answer, didn't we? What's the relationship between the two? Which one would you preach on if you gave the choice? It's my turn to preach on Sunday, and it happens to be Oktoberfest, so I don't know what I'm going to do. But what Jesus is saying here in both of these stories is that even a tiny faith is transformative, but it's always going to be exercised in this context of service, humility. Faith works through us. In that story of the mustard seed and the mulberry tree, faith works through us to do our duty as faithful servants of God. But the glory in the end is God's, not ours. If we can do those things, that's because God has enabled us to do them. If we trust that God will give us the strength that we need to do things from day to day, we will be able to see things that we couldn't see before. And that we can even see that something that we think is small and tiny can grow into something that it can amaze and transform the world.
It's interesting. Even our duty, which often, doing your duty sometimes falls tiny.
It does.
And this, Jesus is saying that too. When you merge the two images together, and the moral from the two is that, your duty doesn't seem like much, is the one that's going to transform everything and then can do impossible things.
Yeah. Good note to end on.
Yeah.
Well, if there are any questions, you can raise them post live stream, or now if you want to, or in our little Zoom meeting afterwards, which everybody has the link for, I think. If you don't have the link for that, do let us know. And if you'd like to carry on the discussion afterwards, then we'd be very happy to entertain that that possibility.
Great. Well,
good. Merci.
Thank you.
À bientôt. As I mentioned, this coming Sunday is our Oktoberfest, so we'll have a nice service in the church, followed by a little reception in the garden. It's rather nice that the mustard seed features, given that we will be eating some sausages. Anyway.
Good. Well, thank you, Nigel, and thank you all. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
God bless. Hope to see you again soon. Bye now.